My name is Greg Wendt. I'm Executive Director of Security Solutions here at Pathlock. I come from a long history of PeopleSoft. If you don't know me, I worked with clients or with end customers. So I started back with version 5, working with an oil and gas, or actually retail company at the time. I've also worked oil and gas and higher ed. So I've spent a lot of time as enterprise architect, close to probably 15, 16 years as enterprise architect, and dotted line to the CISO. Implemented a lot of self-service style applications, so understanding how to secure and roll out those applications, and basically have performed all of the upgrades, before they were even PUM upgrades, but touched every major release from 5 all the way to the 9.2 platforms before coming to join the team here, which June will be about 10 years for me. So from that particular perspective, I've been on this side for a little while, but a lot of the challenges that we see and deal with on a daily basis, and talk to customers and non-customers alike and things like that are a lot of things that are built into what you're going to be able to see today. So let's go ahead and get started. When we talk about who is Pathlock, Pathlock really is a market leader in application security and GRC. That's governance, risk, and compliance. We're the industry's foremost application experts, providing a comprehensive security suite of features covering lots of different things. So I'll go into this in a little bit more detail on another slide specific to what we can do within the PeopleSoft systems. But you can see some of the customers that we work with and also some of our partners on there. And what we do have is application security experts, whether that's PeopleSoft, SAP, Oracle, Workday, Oracle Cloud, whichever, system you happen to be working with, there's a good chance that we've already built all of the integrations for this, and you can do a lot of some of the things that you can see today. So it allows you a quick, rapid time to value and really an unmatched ROI. So going specifically into what we can do within the PeopleSoft space, I wanted to drill in a little bit further. So one of the things that we really focus on is the application security controls. For those of you that are familiar with us, that's kind of the Appian platform. It's the application security platform, which allows you to do multiple access controls and integration with single sign-on, all of those types of things within the PeopleSoft system itself. We can also do some of those things for SAP as well. But all of that, the dynamic data masking, the user activity logging, contextual multi-factor, the DLP and the A360, you're going to see a blend of some of all of that today, and really understanding why it's a cohesive platform to protect your PeopleSoft system. But one of the other areas that we're going to be talking about today as well is our Pathlock Cloud solution, which really gives us the ability to do application access governance. And with that, you're going to be able to see and understand some of the risk. And that could be an SOD style risk. It could also be a critical access. And by critical access, we're going to talk specifically about quite a bit of that. That's think about sensitive data access, what somebody's looking at or able to see within the application itself. We can also do compliant provisioning. I'm not really going to demo that one today. This is going to be more about the controls and some of those other types of things. Certifications, the user access reviews and risk reviews, and then privileged access management and role management. So that's really what we can bring to bear within the PeopleSoft space. So let's go ahead and jump into the content. The current state and where we sit today, it really is a challenging environment. A lot of times there is going to be some sort of data loss or breach. Sadly, it's why numerous customers have come to us in the past. It's not necessarily the reason. I would say it could be compliance, it could be a challenge, it could be something across the board. But when you look at the breaches, 74% of breaches involve access to a privileged account. And it's when you look at privileged accounts and you think about how privileged accounts work, it's a real challenge for people or organizations, especially within the PeopleSoft market. Typically, the privileged accounts, especially a very high one like a PeopleSoft administrator or something like that, they're going to end up utilizing two-tier user IDs and passwords into the PeopleSoft systems. 2 out of 3 systems are breached from the outside. It's really typical, because what they'll do is they'll go phishing for credentials, and somebody will end up, giving up their credentials, and then they log in and access the system as them. And they're really the bad actors are really targeting high privileged users. They mine your websites to understand who those users are. So they're going to go in and find out who your payroll administrators are, who your benefit administrators are, somebody who's in charge of expenses, or they're going to mine and find out who they need to target, and they're going to target them very explicitly. And they don't do the whole broad swath of phishing anymore from that particular situation. When we look at the compliance side, this is something that's changing drastically. It's going to be something from a data privacy area that's going to continue to become challenging. I think there's about 14 or 15 different states right now that have some sort of data privacy laws going through legislation. I was talking to a customer about that this morning, honestly, and I hope at some particular point, I've said this numerous times on webinars in the past, that it happens at a federal level, because the particular state that they were dealing with has got some stuff going live in October, and nobody really is dealing with the things that they're going to be challenged with moving forward. So, we probably have as close to anybody with probably a 75 to 85% type of solution already, because of the way that we've started really looking at and managing private data, which is what you're going to be able to see today. And what happens with all of those things is a reputational damage. If something does happen about your organization, whether it's a breach or a data loss or something, there is reputational damage. And it's also going to be external and internal within the organization. External, you're talking a hit to the stock price. Internal, you're going to lose political capital depending upon what happened and how the breach ended up occurring. I've seen different, groups that were basically deemed, unbelievable inside of an organization. And after a breach, they spent so much time researching what happened with the breach, they couldn't find out what occurred. There was a lot of lost time. They ended up missing targets and deadlines on other projects. And all of a sudden, they went from one of the highest performing groups in the organization to one of the lowest performing groups, and it was really out of their control. So that reputational damage can also be internal and external to think about. System outages is a huge cost of what can occur depending upon what type of breach or action you're having to deal with. I read something several years ago that if your system's down like 5 or 7 days and you're not able to restore and get things back up, there's a high probability that you're out of business in the next 3 to 5 years. That's what system outages can ultimately cost you. And 52% of security events cause operational outages that affect some sort of productivity. And when you look at these ERP systems, whether it's PeopleSoft or SAP or Workday, when they're down, a lot of times you can't function as a normal business at that particular point. So what do you do with that disruption? And when you look at understanding the breaches and how people are accessing these systems, it takes 197 days to identify and 69 days to contain a breach. My question is, why is it taking almost 200 days to identify? That means somebody was in and active in your system for almost, over half a year, basically, before you knew they were even there. So that's one of the things that causes a lot of the challenges. And really, what's happened with that is there's been a lot of challenges within the audits, internal and external audit, which is really pushing organizations to adopt greater controls of how they protect their environment and what they're able to have insight into. And one of those key areas is really about shared, privileged credentials. Think about a PeopleSoft administrator, batch accounts, DBAs, things like that, to where a group of people may have access to that account, even if you're resetting the password and things like that. The problem is there is a lost connection between the identity of who the person is using the account and what the actions were with that account. So when somebody logs in as a shared account, how do I differentiate between the 2, 3, 5, 10, or 50 different users that may have access to that account? How do I know who did it at that particular point? You know, there may be 3 or 4 people who logged in with the same account at the exact same time. So, you know, once that high privileged user logs in with a shared credential, that connection between the identity and the action is severed. And that's one of the key issues with audit reports. That's why they're having issues. You know, I had to deal with audit reports for numerous different years, and it was always one of those things that I got dinged on. You know, it was, you know, you have this high privileged account. How do we know that you were the one that did the access? How do we know that you did this? You know, and how do we know what you did? Because we don't have a very detailed track of what you accessed, what you did inside the system. Did you do anything outside of what your normal scope of business should have been? Did you do anything that caused a privileged abuse of data and access, which we hear about all the time, you know, especially within your development and test systems or even staging systems, where, you know, if somebody needs to test as somebody or somebody wants to log in, they can just change a password, log in as that user, and you have no idea who's using the system. So there's lots of different reasons why this has come out, you know, and those are examples, real world examples of people who I've talked to. You know, high privileged users can potentially exploit end user accounts by simply logging in as self-service. They can look at them, they can find out their pay, they can find out where they live, phone numbers, sensitive information, all of that type of stuff. You know, just the other day, I was talking to a potential client at that particular point in time, and we were talking about the batch accounts. And somebody had gone in and run entire processes with batch accounts, and then they purged the process monitor, so they couldn't trace back who it was or what happened. You know, so obviously they knew enough about what was going on that they were trying to protect themselves at that particular point to hide their own footsteps. You know, so what did they do? Obviously it was some sort of attempted fraud that they were working on at that particular point, you know, to try to sweep it under the rug and come back through. And that's, you know, that's why you need the visibility. You know, and that lack of visibility can create control weaknesses that can really, you know, lead to a failed audits or, you know, concerns within that audit. So what is the status quo right now for a lot of the PeopleSoft privileged accounts? You know, it's either going to be a shared high privileged account or end user account. Sometimes you've got secondary accounts that people are going to utilize, and you've got to go in and ask security. Sometimes it's the security is going to sit over your shoulder and they're going to watch what you do. You know, the problem with that is all of those things become very difficult to audit. You know, how does internal audit deal with, you know, okay, Jimmy stood over my shoulder and watched that I didn't do anything out of bounds? How do you prove that? You know, that's one of the large challenges when you're talking about internal and external audit is you have to prove that your controls are actually working. You know, and even videoing or screen scraping or things like that become very difficult to audit because you might have to go back through and physically watch all of those things. So it's, you know, a challenge when you're talking about IT dev, you know, even power users that are switching back and forth between all of these different accounts. You know, some of them have put into effect some sort of break glass. You know, I can request it when I need it. I can go through that. You know, an admin might manage the time, but it's really an unclear audit trail. You know, even if it's a break glass and 10 people have access to be able to work with that account, how do you really tie all of that connection back and forth? Another area that we see a lot of challenges around is really just role-based access controls. You know, with our security platform, we really have the ability to go into attribute-based access controls. But when we talk about role explosion, it's you know, crazy as to how many different roles some organizations have. I was talking to somebody, and this was probably a year ago, but from a security model, all of their roles were so convoluted that when they hired somebody, they got all new roles. So everybody had custom roles for everything they did. They never reused a role internally inside of the organization. So you talk about just exploding in understanding of what the different roles are out there. How do you know somebody is accessing the information within the role? Are they even utilizing it? You know, when you're talking about unnecessarily exposure of data and transactions, you know, there's a lot of compliance issues around that. when you can view and modify sensitive either data, like GDPR or the CCPA, or, or financial data, for example, and fraud and theft is a big issue with that, attempting to manipulate the bank account details before a payment run, all those types of scenarios. And then you have your business policies, and how do you really tie to the effect of, I've got these business policies and I need to make them truly, check and balance inside of my security policies inside of the application itself. So that could be something like data exfiltration. How do you control the fact that I only want data to be downloaded out of PeopleSoft when somebody's working internal, not external? If they're coming in from the World Wide Web, then I don't want them to be able to take data out. I don't want them to be able to see certain data at that particular point, and that's going to help with ITAR and SOX and all of those types of things. So lots of different controls and regulations are really pushing organizations to have to look at other ways that they can protect their systems, and one of them is obviously through our enhanced ERP security with granular and contextual security model. The Pathlock security platform allows us to do field and transaction level data protection. It turns it around and looks at the data first, rather than, oh, I've got access to this particular transaction. Maybe I want to bring in dynamic and contextual security that allows me to protect that data based upon how that user is accessing the system. And then we have real-time user behavior and visibility into all of that. So you'll see a lot of the different features and functions over there, on the right-hand side. And it really is, bringing in a multi-phased layered approach to a security model. And what you're trying to do is minimize your risk to get down to the lowest level of risk that you possibly can. And with doing that, you're going to have to layer those controls in to protect your environment. Whether you're doing single sign-on and integrating with single sign-on, how are you going to do multi-factor? Are you enforcing that all of your users are going through multi-factor 100% of the time? I think that's a challenge for a lot of organizations, even when they're integrating with SSO. Why? Because of the privileged use of it. For example, if you have a two-tier user account that's a PeopleSoft administrator and it's logging in without multi-factor authentication, you're technically bypassing a lot of the security controls. And if that account gets breached and that happens, you're going to have a real hard challenge proving that to your cyber insurance policy. Okay, we had a breach and it was tracked back to this account, and that account doesn't do MFA. Okay, well, we're not going to cover you, because that's your due diligence. That's what you have to do. Contextual controls. You definitely want to decide whether somebody's internal or outside the organization, and then you want to make it contextual as to whether or not they have access to the data. How should they work with transactions? We don't want them running payroll at 3 o'clock in the morning, those types of scenarios. Fine-grained data security, how do we want them to present that data? Do we want them to see it? Do we want it masked? All of those other types of controls. And then really the user logging and activity logging and the analytics. And I'm going to go into that in detail to where you guys can see that and why it's important. Other things that we can do, especially when you're looking at our Pathlock Cloud solution, is we're going to integrate all of these things together. When we talk about user onboarding, that's going to be the joiner, mover, leaver process, specifically the joiner. What happens? We can automate that based upon an event inside the PeopleSoft system. So you can build and have an account created in Active Directory and PeopleSoft and all of those other type of transactions, or all those other systems, with all of the permissions that you need. It allows you to build in a least privileged security model up front. Then you can come in and really layer in the access governance. So when somebody is asking for additional authorizations, let's compare that. Do they have critical access? Do they have SOD risks that are going to be exposed if they get this additional access? And then how does that affect their user access reviews that we need to do? Do we know whether they're accessing this? Are they using it? Should they have access to it? Because that's going to help you define and protect your roles. Once again, this is about minimizing your entire risk to the organization as a whole, and then identity and data security. Integrating with SSO, integrating with multi-factor authentication and data masking dynamically, and then alerting to when certain events and things like that are happening. So let's go ahead and jump in and demo. So I'm going to jump into another system here. So I'm going to show a couple of different things, multiple different ways here. So bear with me because I'm going to go in and out of a lot of different systems today. So let's start with, I'm going to log into a PeopleSoft system utilizing single sign-on. That's a key thing to many of the organizations. And when I'm accessing this, what we can do IP or SP initiated single sign-on, and I'm communicating with Microsoft ADFS at this particular moment. I can also do Okta. We can do any SAML2 provider, but I'm putting in, credentials for a user ID that's a low privileged user. I'm now in as an employee self-service user. This allows me access to the system with one user ID and password. I can also do MFA at the SSO event if that's the way, because it's going to enforce whatever risk-based rules you have on your SSO provider at that particular point in time. So you can do MFA there. If we drill in and look at personal details, for example, and look at the additional information, one of the things that we're going to show you here is the fact of we are able to protect the data a couple of different ways. So this is able to be done without customizing your PeopleSoft system at all, which is very important. Our data masking is very different than what's done on the PeopleSoft system and what they deliver. We have the ability to toggle data on and off. We also have the ability to track that somebody accessed certain information. We also have the ability to contextually say, maybe let's just do a static mask at this particular point. So what it does is it allows you to protect your PeopleSoft system in an environment and in a way that really does this multiple different ways. So it can say, all right, in this particular scenario, I'm coming in remotely. Do I need to display the sensitive information here? I probably don't need to display the social security number. I don't want that data to be exposed, and I don't want the date of birth to be exposed. But what if I'm on the corporate network or on the local network? Yeah, I can. I can display that. I can make it a click to view. A lot of times from a data privacy perspective, we need to be able to track when somebody views a field. That's why we call it the click to view. You can easily toggle it on and off and see that data. So you can see it easily, but what it does is on high privilege pages, back office pages, you can remove that data and then you can track and understand, all right, this user has accessed the data. They've actually looked at it and viewed that sensitive data. Or you have the ability to say, oh, it's a particular role of users, we want to mask that data. We don't want them to see that at all. Even though it's on the page, we don't want that group of users to see it. So now you're not having to customize PeopleSoft to implement any of those things. You can pick and choose exactly how you want your data to be presented when that user is accessing the system and how the user is accessing the system. All of the roles permission lists are still into effect. So all of that's going to stay just exactly the way it is now. What we are doing is bringing in an attribute-based access control layer that sits on top of that, which is all very important because like the click to view allows me to understand who has accessed information. And I'll come back to that, especially when we start talking about logging transactions and data and those types of things. When we look at the ability to take access controls even further, one of the areas that we focus on is really contextual-based multi-factor authentication. This allows you to deliver your PeopleSoft system in a way that you don't have to enforce MFA at login. You can contextually apply that MFA whenever it makes sense within the application. I'm a big proponent of doing it at the point in time of when it's required or when it's needed. So there's a big example of direct deposit. This has been a very targeted transaction. There's been a lot of organizations who have released this, brought it back, released it, brought it back because they get targeted. They end up with payroll theft and they have to deal with it. So in this scenario, what we've done is for you to be able to view, access, work with the account number, you have to go through it's very similar to a click to view, so no customization to the page, but we've integrated it with multi-factor authentication rather than just presenting the data. This happens to be done with Duo. We've got, numerous different partners of MFA that we can do that. I'll approve that real quick. And now I've got access to the account number. I can work with it, change with it, do whatever I need to do at that particular point. So really allows me to control how I want the access of that data to occur and where and when. So maybe I have the MFA when I'm off the network. Maybe I don't when I'm in. You can have that type of customization to the rules. You're not customizing PeopleSoft to do it. It's all of that policy and decision making of how you want to do that. So all of those really allow you to protect the data of that end user. Now when we get into what am I going to do when we're talking about privileged users, batch accounts, shared accounts, all of those types of things. Typically, those are the accounts, especially within a two-tier environment or within a normal environment of SSO, they don't have credentials to work with SSO. So how do you log in as those? You're going to go in a two-tier mode, you're going to log in and you're going to be done, right? You're going to move on. So it really loses the connection between who that user is. So what we've developed is a privileged access that really allows you to switch identities, but it's going to hold you to who the originating user was. So what we do is we grant them the ability to change into a specific account. In this situation, it's like a high privileged account, so it's just a copy of PS. But now I'm in as that high privileged user. What we're going to do, and you can see that we're holding that original connection. Who was the originating user and who are they acting as now? So we can hold that tie. So now all of a sudden, when you're working with those audit reports or the challenges, you can say, oh, it was Greg, it was Vicky, it was Jimmy, it was whoever actually performed this function, because we know, and once again, this log is only going to fire when in this particular transaction comes up, when somebody does this. So we're going to track that it was Vicky's in originally, they're acting as PS1, and here's the menu component pages, the keys that they accessed, all of that type of stuff. So you're able to understand and see into that particular process flow exactly what that user does when they're trying to implement those particular controls. I'm going to show one of the other controls that we do pretty frequently. Let me see if I've got it here. I don't believe I do, and I don't. So let me go into favorites. We're going to do workforce administration. Let's do personal information, and we're going to modify a person. The reason I wanted to show the modify a person, and I'm just going to grab somebody here. So let's grab Alice. This is more of a back office page. Obviously, you can have users that are working with the back office page. All of our field masking technology works without customizing the page. It works on the Fluid. It works on the Classic Plus, the Classic pages. It works across the board. What you'll see here is really we have a couple of different click to views, one around the date of birth, one around the national ID. This is where that data typically is going to be exposed. It's a high privilege page. Somebody has to have access to this data, but just because they have access to the page doesn't mean they need to see 100% of the data all the time. It's really important from that perspective to think about it as, how do I protect my organizational data? Just because somebody is, maintaining this information doesn't mean 100% of the time they need access to it. If I need to see it, once again, all they do is click the URL, and they're going to be able to see that information. So, but the important part is of that, we now logged it. So now we have a specific reference of this particular user accessed it, page, component, all those other types of things. Another thing is the downloading of information. The grids, the queries, you define it, you look at it to understand exactly what you want to see. If I attempt to download data, what's going to happen is we're going to stop that process. This can be contextual. It can be on the network, off the network. This allows you to control and protect your data and keep it within your PeopleSoft system, which is where it's got the correct privacy and security controls and things like that. You don't want it to leave the system. So lots of different controls we have in place there. One of the things that I wanted to show real quick is, the reporting and understanding as to what's going on, because it's not just putting in controls, it's how do I verify that these controls are working correctly, and what is it secure and protect my environment with. So I thought I'd show a little bit of the A360 platform here real quick, because when we talk about specifically the click to view usage. So when I'm going to expand this, so within the click to view, you have a couple of different things that have become very important. One, it allows you to see the different users that have performed a click to view, who have accessed certain information. And this is explicit. We know exactly when and where this occurred and when that user accessed that data. So it only is a positive style log. We know what IP address they came in from when they did it, which system, or if any of it was after hours. That's a definable context. So maybe 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. is after hours. So did anybody view something, at a remote period of time? You can also do a rough geomap of where that took place. Looking at the raw data, we've got date timestamps, the user, their IP address, the component, the field that they access, the key. We can also show you the page as well, that's there. But then we also show the rule that actually fired this. So what security policy came into effect here? They looked at the birth date or the national ID. We don't want to populate that sensitive information. We want it to be very targeted to say, all right, here's a pointer as to what was accessed. We don't want to replicate that information again. We want it to be very targeted. Nice part about this is you can filter and view this multiple different ways, and all of our dashboards work like this. So I'll just call it out kind of once. If you want to look at who's accessed from this IP address, I can filter and find out what what user ID was coming in from that particular IP address. Sometimes it might be multiple. Was any of it after hours, the raw data, and then all the different employee IDs. Another thing that you can do is filter up here. I can grab one of these and I have the ability to filter by the user who was signed in or by the individual employee that was accessed. So when you're talking about different privacy laws, sometimes people can call in and say, I want to know who viewed my data. That's important. Well, now I can see who's accessed their information. It came up the other day. Somebody was asking me, what about, a rough geomap? So if I want to filter on people who have access from a particular country, I can click on that. Once again, it's going to change the entire dashboard to filter just for access from that particular location. So it allows you to understand where is my private data being accessed, who has accessed my private data, and when did they access my private data. Going back to the dashboards, going back to the privileged access. So privileged access is really understanding when somebody goes into that privileged access mode, what they're doing. So, we can look at the reasonings up here, but I'm going to go ahead and look at, I've got the date timestamp, I've got the originating user, who they were, who they switched to. So once again, it's keeping that connection of who the user is and who they're tied back to. I can see the component, the page, and we also have the keys as well as to what the user accessed when they did that particular transaction as well, which is very important to really understand exactly what was done as that user. I'm going to go back to the dashboards and I want to look at compliance because this is something we've done quite a bit of work on. What you'll see here at the top is, first off, did somebody attempt to download data? As that transaction that I was working with before, when I attempted to download the grid, that's where we're going to log that. We're going to say, oh, Vicky or PS or Greg attempted to download that data. Did it have sensitive data? Did it not have sensitive data? What type of information it was? Now I want to talk a little bit specifically about the pages accessed by PII. What we've done here, and I'll show you the setup and the configuration of it in just a second, but what we've done is we've taken and built into the PII data model and built that into the PeopleSoft system really around GDPR type access. So we're tracking individual fields and building all of the metadata of what somebody can access. So basically you define what fields you're interested in looking at, and we've predefined and built all of that for you, but it allows you to know like a national ID, social security number is on personal data 1. So all of these different fields, are all of these different pages have sensitive information. What we've done with that on the back end, I'll show you the setup of it here real quick, is I'm going to go into the controls here. I'm going to go up to our menu item. So I'm going to go into the analytics and I'm going to go into the PII setup. What this is about is understanding where your sensitive data is, who's accessing your sensitive data, and building a model to help you understand your risks. So what we've done, I'll just grab a field here. I'll deal with birth date. We've built this. So in HCM, if I go back to the search real quick, we've built the model in Campus Financials and HCM. I'm in HCM, so I'm going to pull open that one. What we've done is there's all of the level 1 fields, there's 26 of them. There's 215 fields that are considered sensitive or confidential. So what we've done is when we look at the row counts, we can go in and understand all of the different records that actually contain data that have that field on it. So we see there's 33 records that contain at least one row of data. You know, this field might exist on more records than that, but they don't have any information. So, you know, it helps you target where is my sensitive data stored. The other thing that we're going to do is give you the references. So where can this field be viewable within the application itself? And this is a really big question to a lot of organizations because it's difficult. This is where we understand the PeopleSoft system, the metadata, and we can drive all of these things. So if I look at this, for example, we give you the menu, the component, the page, and also the navigation. So when we're looking at the navigation, that's how you would get there. We've also got the URL. So if you've got the security, you can pop out. I like to call out the health benefits here because it looks like it's identical, but the URLs are different. The navigation is just a little bit different between those. So there could be different security involved in each one of those, and you need to understand that there is a difference between those. So it allows us to really understand, okay, where is my data? Where can I reference my data? And then also, is this particular field used in any sort of queries that are out there? So you can quickly understand that. So that's where this is built. You can create an add-on, modify this. You can move fields from one to the next. You can add your custom fields into it, but that's really where we're pulling all of that information in there to build that model. So we're helping you understand your risks of where that data is, who's accessing that data, when and where, all of that type of stuff. What I want to do is take this one step further, and I'm going to show you a little bit of our PathLock cloud system at this particular point. So I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to open up one of my systems to where I can show you what we're doing with the next steps. So inside of PathLock Cloud, a lot of what we're doing is presenting risks, getting you to understand how the usage of the system is affecting your day-to-day risk as a whole. So one of the things that we've done there is I've actually set up high-risk activities. So if I look at the high-risk activities configuration, this is where we're pre-populating this with much of the data that I just showed you of here's all of the level 1 fields, because now we know all of the different locations of where that is inside of the application, right? So we can see that I've got the system, HCM, campus solutions. I can tab through here. We'll see a lot more HCM on the next page, but each one of these is basically a component page combination. It's an activity that allows me to see a social security number and national ID are exposed on all of these different pages within those two application sets. So now that I've mapped those, it allows me to understand and compare that to what my usage looks like. And this is where we're marrying the products of the security platform with the PathLock Cloud and being able to exchange data and move back and forth. So I'm going to go back to my search here, and I'm going to do high risk activities for the individual user. Let me back this up just a little bit from a date time, and I'll hit display. So what this does now is it's going to give me log data about users who have accessed those high-risk activities. So I've built all those high-risk activities, and now I can blend in and say, all right, this is when it was last utilized. Here's the date timestamp, their IP address. This is a high-risk activity, and what was the activity that they were working with at that particular point. So I can quickly filter on all of the different high-risk activity and who performed it within the PathLock Cloud system. So now it helps me understand what's happening, who's utilizing it, who's touching it. So if I take that a step further, now I can look at it from an access point of view of, I'm going to filter here. Let's look at Betty Lockerty. This is looking at an employee who's within our system. This would be your employees. The nice part about this is it's going to give you a concerted look of all of the different applications that we're syncing with. So as I look at the users, you're going to see that I've got Active Directory, I've got HCM, I've also got Campus Solutions down here. So this particular user has accounts in multiple different systems, and we can sync with lots of different ERPs. So this could be Workday, it could be SAP, it could be Oracle Cloud. We can pull all of that in. So now all of a sudden, when we're looking at doing a user access review and certifying that, we can combine those together. We can have those high risk activities or your SODs and compare them. So here's all of the different users. If I look at the activities, these are going to be all of her specific activities. You can see here there's a couple that aren't, considered high risk. Others are. Gives me the date timestamp of when that occurred, which system, whether it was in campus or HCM. So very quickly I can get a view as to what this individual's access looks like. I can also look at the roles. And I'm going to toggle this up and down here a little bit because I want to look at the ones that have actually got usage. So now when I do a user access review, rather than just looking at it from the perspective of can this user access information, now I can fully answer, did they? So this is a huge step in being able to close that gap. So now when I look at the individual roles that this user is working with, I can see what the individual activities are and if they utilized them and if they're a high risk activity, for example. So here's where this is the additional information. Well, there's a birth date, there's a social security number there. That's, there could be possible data loss there. So that is a high risk activity, even though it's something that's considered a self-service page. So that's where I might want to decide of how I mask that data, which is why we have those data protection rules in place. So we can see when it was accessed on both the additional information on the addresses, and they didn't access anything else in that role. Do we need to trim that role down? Are they, does it show them too much? Do we need to change that? So that's where we can get into that with all of the different user access reviews now and understand what that user did. I kind of just performed an ad hoc user access review by accessing this with just looking at the employee profile. But if I were to schedule that, it's going to blend all that in. You're going to be able to see all of that information as well. So, it allows you to really understand the difference between can do and did do from an organizational perspective and the data accessed inside of that system. So just wanted to show you that. I'm going to flip back over to the PowerPoint real quick. So when we look at the risk-centric approach to identity governance, PathLock has really got the advantage of fine-grained access analysis and provisioning. As you can see, we're able to pull in the data, the transactions, understanding who's working with what inside of the system to really give you the information that's important in understanding of what they did do. So the difference between that can do and did do, it's going to help quantify and understand that risk, because it's going to specifically give you that information to paint that picture as to what that user was doing in the system, and it could end up changing your security policies to, how you protect that data and integrate that with data masking and MFA and all of those types of things, or high privileged access on the back end. So all of those things can be integrated into the PathLock solution, and it allows you really a centralized policy management as well. Taking it a step further, some of the, day one tangible benefits, from an IT perspective, it's going to ease the IT workload, and it's going to allow you to increase efficiencies. One, it can automate the reporting side of this because all of that can be stored and done within the PathLock Cloud solution. It's also going to reduce the risk of breach because you can speed up the provisioning. I didn't demo the provisioning today on this particular one, but we can provision with least privileged access roles, especially all of the different, security or the main self-service style access. So when you're talking about that style of access, you can quickly provision 100% of your users. And at that particular point, you could come in and go through a request, which is typically going to have an approval for them to have additional access, whether, that's sensitive data or, functional financial data or whatever. But they're going to need additional approvals to be able to go through that. And then we can automate the offboarding as well. So that really is going to reduce the tasks that IT and security are going to have to do. And it's going to affect the business users as well. Streamlining tasks like onboarding and offboarding and revoking access. They're not going to have to worry about it. Revoking access is a key. Many organizations are looking at that right now. And how do I trim the time? How do I get a terminated or, somebody who's retired or quit? How do I get them out of my systems in less than 24 hours? It's a big key, and it's a big issue for a lot of orgs because of the fact of that's where a lot of breaches come from. that account is accessed and looked at, or gained access to after that user leaves the organization as a whole. So there's a lot of different reasons as to why you need to do that. The UI, as you can see, is very efficient. It's very streamlined. Users can understand what's happening. And then we're also going to empower internal audit with the controls. They're going to be able to see the data directly out of the PathLock cloud or the A360 platform to see what users are doing. It's going to be accurate. It's reliable. It's produced directly out of transactions that people have done inside of the systems. So it helps answer all of those questions very efficiently and quickly. You don't have to spend a lot of time, shifting through emails or trying to reproduce something that, after the fact you can't do. You'd be able to have that data up front to be able to provide the information to answer those questions, which is ultimately going to lower the risk for your organization as a whole. So PathLock really delivers contextual data security for the PeopleSoft system, whether you're talking about strengthening your application or authentication, whether that's integration with SSO, whether that happens to be SAML, whether it's OIDC, however you want to communicate, we can do that, or it's the integration of stepped up authentication. There's a lot of different organizations that we're dealing with now of how do you handle people who exist within our identity provider and people who don't, and how do we secure that and make sure that we're meeting and matching all of our goals from MFA. It's a big question for a lot of organizations, and we can help you there. But it's also controlling user access dynamically. Contextual attributes, the device, the location, the privileges. What should that mean to me when I'm defining my data access? That should help me protect my data and make choices on how they should look and view and see that data depending upon those contextual access and time of day, for example. So, and then also monitoring the user activity. I've said for years on some of these webinars, when I had my team, it was always, how can I defend you? Well, to be able to defend my development team, I still needed the information to understand what they did. That data that's used for incident response is the same data that's used for understanding what somebody accessed within the system. So you've got to be able to have that data, number one, and then you've got to understand what that data is telling you. And two, it's got to be referenceable and quickly accessible so that you can tie all of those things together and get those quick answers. Otherwise, if you can't get the quick answers, it becomes difficult to completely secure your environment because you really don't know what's going on inside of your environment. That's why that user activity monitoring is so important, is to close that loop and understand what's actually occurring within your systems. So with that, I'm going to bring Stephanie in and open it up for Q&A. If you do have any questions specifically that you don't want to ask today, or if you want us to follow up with you specifically, you can email us at info@pathlock.com, and we would definitely follow up with any questions or concerns there as well.
Thanks, Greg, for that presentation. Again, if you do have any questions, we encourage you to add them now into the questions box. We had one question pop up just about the recording of the webinar. This webinar has been recorded and will be sent out to all attendees and those that registered within the next few days. So you can look in your email for that within the next few days. And with that, I'll just say thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Greg, for that presentation, and have a great day.